get started. And I'll stay on in case people have questions afterwards. You should let me know. So welcome to the political system of the United States of America. Here's the outline for today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, about my experience here at the university, and just a little bit to get to know me. The content of the course, kind of like teasers for the kinds of things you might be learning. I'll teach you a little bit about the teaching philosophy and the general kind of learning goals, since they're, I think, a little bit different than what you might be used to. And then we'll talk about exams and assignments and all of that kind of stuff. All right. So, yep, we've got a strange syllabus and very strange exams. You've never taken exams like this. And I know that because I invented it, the kind of exam. But there's plenty of opportunities for extra credit. Most of the assignments are by completion. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But first, a little bit of a chance to get to know me, and then hopefully something will spark your interest, and then you'll come to office hours and talk to me. So I'm a first-generation college student. I wanted you to know that in case you had anything relevant to talk to me about regarding my experiences there. I was a German literature major, Spanish minor, so I speak German and Spanish fluently, oddly. And then I fell in love with statistics and data analysis in grad school. Like really fell in love in a way that, was bizarre, since I weaseled out of taking any math in college. And so anyway, so that was kind of a fun experience. I've lived in Germany for years. I lived in Venezuela for a year. I'm from Las Cruces, New Mexico. And there's a famous scientist that we'll be speaking about next week, who's also from Las Cruces. She was born in Mexico, but from Las Cruces. I lived in Houston for 20 years. Beyonce and Lizzo went to my high school. I am much older than they are, so I was not there at the same time, but that's a little fun fact. And you should come to office hours. I'm just going to keep an office hours link open, so you can just join in and ask me questions and have fun, talk about whatever. I've had 49 jobs. That's another little fun fact. Okay, so let's talk about my teaching. I've been here at CU now for 25 years. I think I've been here longer than anybody in the department. Yeah, I think that's right. I've taught American political systems 15 times, so I've done this before. I've taught classes on how to engage in dialogue with people you disagree with. I also teach a lot of the law classes because I wrote a book about the Supreme Court. And I teach a lot of data analysis and statistics, since that's my love. My research, I've been working on a book about what causes people to support the rule of law or reject it in favor of violence. If you're interested in that, please come talk to me. I am doing research on how students learn, trying to make higher education better. A lot of us in the department are really passionate teachers. And so I've been doing some research about that. You'll hear a little bit about that coming soon. I have a paper, Why the Supreme Court Can Only Make Conservative Economic Policy. And I'm generally interested in what humans share in common with one another. I every time I see a human, I'm like, oh, they're my people, and so I just am always kind of curious for what makes us different, what makes us the same. Let's talk about my first baby, which is my first book, Answering the Call of the Court. It predicted statistically speaking, I translated the legal rationales into statistics and showed how there's sort of a informal communication between justices and interest groups and how that alters the agenda. My next two babies, aren't they sweet? All right, so there's two kinds of course content that I'll talk to you about today. I'm going to talk about humans and how they relate to their political systems. I think political science is the most important field, but that's my bias. So you'll hear a little bit about that. And the nature of science. A lot of the STEM education researchers are saying that in order to teach science to students, we need to teach it in a way that has them understand the nature of science, not as a body of facts to memorize. And so I've got some provocative things to say about that. Most of what you learn in this class is not technically true, and that's for a reason. I feel like it's maybe not so great about education that we just sort of tell you, here's some stuff we know for sure, learn it, and then tell us what you learned. And I sort of want to tell you about some of the science that's not 100% true, so that you can decide for yourself whether you're convinced by the argument or not. So I like that, for students to be able to sort of prepare in that way. So, okay. So let's talk about what you're going to learn about the political system. And in a sense, we're going to learn how political scientists do history and how political scientists do science. Political science has tried to explain why the rule of law and democracy came about in the first place. And they do not believe it's because powerful people were suddenly, I would like to share my power, which is not something humans like to do necessarily. Why colonialism was so effective and so terrible. We're going to talk about why the US has a Senate. We're going to talk about why the Civil War was predestined to occur in 1860. This is a picture of John C. Calhoun, and I like this one because he is an evil genius, and he's literally both. He is evil and he's a genius. I've learned a lot from reading his books. In fact, as racist as this guy was, Black nationalists took his political theories and applied it to what they were thinking about. So it's kind of interesting. But in 1850, he said, this country will go to war over the election of a president in 10 years, which is exactly what happened. So political scientists have an explanation for that. The strange story of how we got the Electoral College when no one in history, not today, not then, ever wanted it as their first preference. So that's kind of interesting. And then we'll be talking in the latter part of the class how institutions duel for power. Wonder if I got rid of this. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Okay, so the content, and of course, we're going to be talking about some logical fallacies in scientific inference, sort of learning from the mistakes of that scientists have made. Why do we get the importance of mass so wrong in 2020? Literally, it's a story about two doctors that didn't like each other at Harvard in the 1940s. So that's kind of a fun story. How CU Boulder scientists started a open letter to the WHO to move the science forward. How a CU Boulder sophomore challenged conventional wisdom about what causes COVID attitudes, challenging that it's not a story about politics, it's a story about personality. You'll hear more about that. How some scientists and mathematicians and all kinds of scientists led members of Congress astray in the 20th century. A lot of that we're making up for now in the social sciences as well as other scientists. How a correlation scientists knew was spurious led to everything we know about Alzheimer's. And here's a logical fallacy that comes from the mantra that correlation does not equal causation. And that's true. But correlations are useful and helpful. You just need to know how to interpret them and how to diagnose them. And we're not going to really do that in this class, but we're going to talk about how scientists have navigated the uncertainty associated with correlation and how people picked up some clues from this spurious correlation. And before they did this, we knew nothing. We couldn't treat it. We couldn't figure it. We had no idea what caused it. And this happened in the 90s and sort of brought all of what we know about Alzheimer's into being. So that's kind of a fun story. Why it took scientists so long to believe that viruses can cause cancer. Dr. Sarah Stewart is from Las Cruces, has likely affected your life. All right, so we'll talk about that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the content of the course. Assignments, quizzes, exams. The exams are difficult. Everything else is easy, and there's lots of extra credit. So let's talk a little bit about that. So we're going to begin and end with 2 critical thinking exercises. These are graded for completion, so you don't have to worry about how you're going to do on them. You just, as long as you do them and make a good faith effort, you get full credit. And so we'll be doing 2 of those, and they're 2 different ones. And technically, I'm not allowed to know what's on the what questions are on there, but I'm familiar with this exercise, and it's kind of a fun exercise in thinking through alternative explanations. There are 2 required essay assignments. Notice that in combination, with the 2 together, they're only worth 6% of your grade. The first one is graded for effort, but we'll give you feedback according to a very detailed rubric. If you want to look at the rubric, it's on Canvas. So the first one is due soon, coming up here. And then the second one will be graded according to that rubric. So you'll get the feedback, you'll make another argument. It has to be a different topic, and sort of see if you can correct some of the errors that you made in the first one. Recitation and attendance together, they're worth 10%. Just showing up is 5% of your grade. But the TAs will assess how active you've been in your recitation, and you'll get 5 extra points for that. At the end of the semester, there's a final self-assessment where you're going to answer some questions where you kind of self-assess what you learned, what you didn't learn, what you found challenging, what could be better, what could you have done better, that kind of thing. And it's basically graded for you've given it some thought. And it's 10% of your entire grade. Exams are worth 50% of your grade. They're open note, open book, open internet, but they're multiple choice. And that sounds like, well, it sounds at odds with one another, and I can see why you might think that. But they're actually quite difficult, and the answers aren't in your notes. So, I mean, that's part of the thing, is that you have to have developed skills and course familiarity along the way without memorizing anything. So the first exam is soon. It's week 4. Doesn't say on here when it is, but it does on Canvas and on the syllabus. It's 10% of your grade, and then the next 2 exams are worth 20% of your grade. And we'll talk about the nature of those exams in a minute. I'll show you some examples of questions. So half of your grade, even if you do no extra credit, is for completion. You just have to do the assignments because the exams are difficult. Okay, so let's talk about my pedagogical approach, my approach to pedagogy and how students learn. So I'm going to teach you specific logical tools. I'm going to teach you what not to do in an essay if you're making an argument. It could be a causal argument. You could be making an ethical argument about what should the world look like. And I'm going to be teaching you to identify common logical mistakes. And then you apply those tools in conjunction with what you've learned in the coursework. And then I'm going to present you with logical fallacies in an essay I write. So I write the essay, you critique it. And basically that's how it works. How to study. You don't want to worry about details in the lecture and details in the readings. You want to worry about thinking about how the readings speak to one another, what you've learned. You want to sort of apply. So I like the idea of meeting in a weekly study group so that you can talk about what was surprising, what you thought was nonsense, which is great. That's what I want you to be thinking about. And so you want to sort of get a big picture from the readings. And don't worry about details. If you need a detail, you can look it up, right? It's open note, open book. You take the exam from home, if you want to, or you can take it in class if you don't have a good internet connection, or in the testing center if you have accommodations. But if you have accommodations, you just have longer to work on the exam if you want to take it from home. Also practice. With every exam, we have a practice exam, and we're using a sort of revolutionary software app that was developed for this purpose, in which we ask you questions that are like the exam. You give your thought process for the answers, and then you get specific feedback from me, directly from me. I'm writing all the feedback, to see what I have to say about an error. And then the software picks the next question to kind of test you in that skill. So the practice exams are actually quite useful. And there's also practice quizzes before the practice exam. Those are extra credit. So in the first exam, I'm going to provide a claim, a sort of a statement. And that statement is going to fall into 6 categories, and you have to categorize it. So I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And the second exam, I'm going to write an essay, and then you critique it. And the third exam is going to have the same kind of essay critique, but it's also going to include some what I call cruel and unusual multiple choice questions. And I'll give you an example of what that one looks like as well. And notice that despite this being multiple choice, you get to defend your answer for partial credit. And so it's not one of these things where I've written the exam and we just score the points. You get to defend your answer. And if we're convinced of your answer, you get partial credit or even full credit for your answer, as long as it's consistent with the logical fallacy that is being tested in that question. All right, here's the good news. You get to defend your answer. Now some examples of questions. So in exam 1, there's 25 questions. All 25 questions ask you to categorize a claim. There are 6 categories of claims, and we're going to be talking about these claims on Thursday of this week. So here's an example of an actual exam question. Now, I've written more than 200 of these statements. Canvas is going to go grab a random sample of those statements and present them to you. So here's one of them. So you might not get this one, but this one is actually on the exam. So here we have corporations that litigate more frequently are often likelier to win in court, and you have to categorize it. And we'll talk about all of these categories soon. Example of exam 2 question. I'm going to provide an essay. You can download the essay. You can read the whole essay. But with each critique, if the critique is about that paragraph, I provide the paragraph so you can look at it to see what's happening there. And then you just answer, I've got the critique there. We did not learn that people hate feeling unfair. If that's a true critique, if that's a valid critique, you enter true. So it's literally a true false test. That makes it kind of easy. And then you get a chance to defend why you thought it was valid or why you thought it was not valid. And here's another example where I have here the first sentence here, and I have the first sentence is not an argument. So you have to say whether it's an argument or whether it's a fact. Here's an example of a final exam question that you will get in this class, but it will have different readings because the readings were from a different class. Which of the following pairs of readings are the most consistent or inconsistent? And so you have to really sort of think about how the readings speak to one another. Are they speaking along the same lines of logic, or is what they have to say have nothing to do with one of the other readings? And so I always give this one ahead of time, so that way you can think it through if you're going to do some weekly group work. So the good news is practice exams, you get 100% credit for good faith effort. So we'll lead you into how to think about the various answers in some practice exams. And then we have 17 points worth of extra credit that you can earn doing different projects. So if you participate in a weekly study group, it's 2 points added to your final grade. And it's not added to your exam grade. These are added to your final grade that you get in the class. So if you make an 80 average on the exams, well, if you do all of the other required assignments, then that brings your score up to 90%, right? And then you can add, points from doing these extra credit assignments, most of which are graded for good faith effort. The quizzes are kind of percent correct. Weekly study group, you just have to do it consistently. And then there's an opportunity to do a group project if you want on a policy brief. If any of you are interested in working in the policy field, the genius sophomore that I'm talking about, she's now graduated and is a policy analyst for quite a reputable organization where they're analyzing policy for state legislatures, and it's a great job. So this is the kind of stuff you would do, and it's a 2 or 3 page group project with lots of infographics, and there's lots of examples and a rubric and a prompt on Canvas if you want to look into that. And I have some ideas about how to get fellow group members. And then there's some optional recitation assignments, and some of them are just a couple sentences. Some of them are, a paragraph, but I mean, you could scribble it on a piece of paper, take a picture of it and upload it to Canvas. That's fine. These are not formal assignments. They're just meant to kind of pique your curiosity about the readings. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the teaching philosophy. Before I do that, I wonder if we have any questions. Oh, I was not able to hear the question.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, there may have been an issue with Canvas or with the Zoom, sorry. Anna, feel free to jump in and correct me but she had issues with accessing the textbook. So she followed the link that you had provided, but it looks like it needs, like you might need to request it formally through the library in order to have access to it. She wasn't able to access the textbook.
Oh, I'll just upload it.
Okay.
I'll upload it to Canvas. Katie, is there any chance you could make a note to
remind I got down the question already just in case for whatever reason you just couldn't hear a question.
I couldn't. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
I have the anyway. Okay. Let's see. Okay. I made a poll to quick answer a couple of questions, just to kind of get your mood about things. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that. Just a few questions. It's like a survey.
Yay!
People are very excited. All right. Did y'all get a chance to answer? So can you all see the responses? Or only I can?
I think you're the only one who can see the responses.
Okay. So let me just tell you then, 7% of you, 7% of you feel like you know a great deal about American politics. A third of you know very little or virtually nothing, which is about what I expected. I never took a political science class in high school. What do I know? I wasn't a political science major either in college, so there was a lot of that. It looks like there's a few people who are very anxious, but most people are not very anxious. And everybody put very excited or somewhat excited. And it looks like 2/3 of you would like to do a weekly study group, and about a third want to do the group policy brief. So if you're doing a group policy brief, come to office hours and talk to me about it. I mean, you don't have to. There's a lot of detailed information about there. But this is great. Thank you for that. Maybe now you can see results. People are interested, some anxious. All right. So let's get started back again with the I'm hearing myself twice. So raise your hand with one of the reactions if you've got a question, because I can't hear myself speak with the back, it's going twice or something. All right, so my teaching philosophy is to stand on the shoulders of giants. We have to learn from their mistakes. In fact, the mistake about not understanding that COVID could be airborne, the scientist who caused that mistake wrote an essay at the end of his life blaming himself for being smug about the fact that diseases couldn't be airborne. Now, nobody read that essay, but he identified himself that he's the greatest epidemiologist of the 20th century. He identified as a personality factor that interfered with that and could have caused untold deaths. I mean, he would be mortified to learn about this. And so it's the kind of mistakes that great scientists make, help us be better in that sense. So you're going to be doing some learning about that, all right. Usually when in education, step 1, I give you information that's true. Step 2, you read, listen, learn. Step 3, you repeat it back in some form on an exam. And then you forget information. And it's just like wash, rinse, repeat. This is a thing from Groundhog's Day. And that has been called the pedagogical equivalent of bloodletting. You know, and we just don't know what else to do. You know, people have tried active learning, and sometimes that can help, and that is seemingly the answer to all of our problems. But I you know, I am constantly thinking, well, what more could we do? What more, how much better could we get? You know, let's test our effectiveness. And the person who said that is Carl Wyman, who is a CU Boulder professor who started our STEM Education Research Center here at CU. And CU is famous for that kind of thing. I'm sorry about the noise. All right. Generally, you're going to be doing more doing than learning knowledge. And basically, what you're going to be doing is learning to connect evidence to claims logically. So we've got a claim, we've got evidence, and we've got reasoning. So we're going to learn some of those things. So here's some examples of what I'm teaching you not to do. And by the way, everyone does this. I'm just trying to get you to learn to pause as you think through a problem and kind of straighten your logical bones in terms of avoiding some common mistakes. First, I'm going to pick on a conservative type argument, but don't worry, progressives, I'm coming for you next. Okay, here's an example of a conservative argument you might hear that ends up being kind of nonsense. We should not have gun control because it would not prevent mass shootings. And besides, guns are protected by the Second Amendment. That argument there just mixes and matches three kinds of claims in one claim without worrying about what is the nature of the kind of evidence that you would need for the three different kinds of claims. And so basically, I'm going to try to work on the entire semester unwashing your brain from thinking this way. And by the way, very smart people think this way. Very smart people make these arguments on you know, as political pundits or whatever. And once I started teaching students to avoid these mistakes, I started seeing them everywhere. And I want you to see them everywhere so you can hold yourself accountable when you're making an argument, but also you can hold other people accountable. I mean, I'm giving you some terminology that is not commonly known. I invented it in a sense. But the logical bones are the same regardless of what you call them. So, and here's a more of a progressive argument that's sort of the same, the other side of the same coin. We should have gun control because it would prevent mass shootings. And besides, guns are only constitutionally protected in a well-regulated militia. And that mixes and matches what the law is versus what's good versus what is moral and what is the right outcome. And so we'll talk about how to navigate this kind of argument. So the first step in being educated is understanding which kinds of claims require which kinds of evidence. Here's some science of learning that I'll share with you. Your brain software is well equipped for certain things and is absolutely your enemy in some ways for thinking logically. So let me tell you, your brain software tells you when you're analyzing something, is this true or is it not true, right? Believe it, not believe it. And I'm trying to interrupt that process and get you to pause and ask a different question. I want you to ask, what game is being played with that claim? What lane are we in? What logical lane are we in? Because as soon as you know what game is being played in terms of what evidence is required, then you can start playing the game more effectively. All right, so simplest case, ask whether a claim is a verifiable, observable claim. So this is one of the kinds of claims that, one of the kinds of categories that you'll answer on the exam. So you want to know not whether it's true, but is this verifiable? Is this something that you could look up and that everybody, once they see the evidence, would agree, yes, this is obvious. We can look on the piece of paper, we know that that's what happened. And sort of get a feeling for what's obvious and what's non-obvious. If it's obvious or observable or has no counter argument, it is not an argument. And this is, or I'm trying to unwash your brain from what you've been asked to do your whole life, probably in college, high school. Here's some facts, memorize the facts, tell us what the facts are. No one's ever, maybe, unless you've taken upper division classes, there's some seniors in this class, you know, but it may be this is the first time you're being asked to navigate a claim that has uncertainty. And one of the most common questions I got in giving students feedback on their essays is, what do you mean it can be valid but not true? Right? And being able to navigate that distinction. I mean, in a sense, I started on a lot of my pedagogy work because for 15 years, I just graded assignments infinitely. If you didn't like your grade, do it again, and I'll grade it again. You don't like your grade, I'll grade it again, you know? And I did that for 15 years in very different formats of classes. And I started to really get the sense of trying to know that I've got to figure out a way to teach the distinction between when something's obvious and true and when something's non-obvious, because my assignments will always ask you to make an argument that is not true. And if it's true, I would give students a 0. I don't want to hear what's true. I want to hear what you think and what your evidence is. And so it's really kind of getting a sense of that. In a sense, summaries are not worth stating. Nobody wants to hear what they can look up on Wikipedia. They want to hear you make an argument that makes them go, wow, I would have never thought about that, but I can see your point. That's what your goal is. All right, so the kinds of things that can be verified and observed directly: facts, correlations, statistics, and there's statistical inferences, which are slightly different. But what the statistic is itself, Biden's approval rating is 48.3. I mean, I don't know what it really is, but you know, you get a number, and that number is a fact. This poll found that. Now you've got to look under the hood and figure out what's going on, or what are the assumptions made and underneath that statistic. But the statistic itself is a fact. The text of scientific studies, the law, literature, historical documents, religious texts, the Bible, the Quran, all of them have texts that are written down, and what's written down is a fact. Now, there's different interpretations of, but putting that aside, you can go look it up and see what was actually said. Certain events of history were facts. World War II happened, you know, that kind of thing. So here's some rules of inference. This is not to say people don't disagree about the facts, but reasonable people should not disagree on the rules of inference. It can happen what is accepted as true is challenged, right? Newtonian physics, that kind of thing. But we follow the same rules. So you trust the rules, not necessarily the person, unless you trust the person to follow the rules. It's sort of that kind of thinking. So arguments that are, you know, pretending to be arguments that are actually verifiable and observable are boring. And we don't want to teach you to do that. We want to teach you to pursue knowledge that's not on the surface. If it's known, that's what you do in high school. University students need to learn how to pursue something that's hidden hidden inferences. And we're going to learn about 5 different kinds, and we're going to do examples of them, and we're going to critique the inferences that are made. And these 5 different kinds of hidden inferences are not the universe of hidden inferences, but they approximate the universe. Like in Minecraft, I know about Minecraft because obviously I have kids. I actually hired my daughter to make this for me. You got to dig to find gems, right? So let's just take a step back and say the preview of week 2 is distinguishing verifiable, observable from other kinds of hidden inferences. And we'll talk about that in the context of scientific mistakes, mostly from the 20th century. So in a sense, another thing I'm preparing you to do is if you're a political science major, which you should all become. I tease the other majors. But even if you're not a political science major, you could take my political science 3075 class, where you create your own scientific hypotheses and then you test them. You know, in 2075, you can learn to code. In 3075, you actually do your own research. And a third of my class presented at national conferences, and they got into schools like Berkeley and Michigan law instead of CU law because they did that. So you should do that too, and come talk to me about it. All right, so I'm kind of preparing you for that. All right, so part 1 of the course is to distinguish 6 kinds of claims. So we're going to talk just a little bit about these claims, but we're going to talk much more detail on Thursday. And so the purpose of this is how to stay in your lane. You can only do one kind of claim at a time. You cannot mix and match. They do not rest on the same evidence, and it's a logical fallacy to mix and match the kinds of arguments. All right, so historic event causality is one of them. It is not science, and that doesn't mean there's not a system of logic to ascertain what led to a specific event. I mean, even it's like, why do I have a stomach ache today? You know, is an event where you're asking about the causality of that event. And that is not a hypothesis that can be tested because it's only one unit in a sense. It's you today. But you could turn yourself into multiple units thinking, well, I didn't have a stomach ache yesterday, and you could track it over time and then try to figure out like what might be probabilistically associated with it. Then it's turned into a research question where you can test the hypothesis. All right, so this is like a person in their brain who is thinking about historic event causality. What caused World War II, you know, is a common one. All right, general predictive causality is science. That's what this person's thinking about. Science is not technically a subject matter, and everybody in the planet believes it's a subject matter. Even smart scientists believe it's a subject matter, but really what it is it's a method of knowing things. And I like to say provocatively, there's no such thing as a scientific fact. And what I mean by that is that once it's a fact, we're not doing science on it anymore. We're not testing the hypothesis about whether gravity exists anymore. You know, science exists on the horizon when we don't know what is causing an outcome. Once a claim is proven, it becomes a verifiable, observable claim. If our theory doesn't help us predict the future, then there's something wrong with our theory. It's not wrong with science. It's wrong with our theory. You know, it's wrong with what we've come up with to explain. We have to think of something else. These two types of causality speak to one another. But even if you're convinced of what caused an event, it doesn't mean that it explains these outcomes in general. or if you're convinced of the evidence of a general predictive causality, you can't claim that it caused a specific event. They sort of fit together, but not perfectly. Where they diverge is your headache may not have been caused by dehydration, even if it's true that dehydration probabilistically predicts a headache. Your Aunt Susie may have gotten lung cancer even if she hadn't smoked. You don't know that smoking caused her cancer just because we know that smoking causes cancer. So here's a couple of examples of where the two different forms of causality diverge. Then there are arguments about what events mean, and I've generally steered away from this type of claim, mostly because these claims irritate me because I like to, there's so much cloud and uncertainty in them. But let's give a couple of examples. So this person is thinking about what events mean. And frankly, humans are meaning-making machines. So we're just running around making meaning out of everything. Like, if I fail this test, that means I'm a failure. Well, no, it actually does not mean that, So it's like, things like that. But people like to do it. And so the 2008 financial crisis means that capitalism is in crisis. These kinds of arguments sort of turn on the meaning of a word. So oftentimes when you're in an argument with somebody about politics, you've just got to take a step back and figure out, are you defining the terms differently? Because often that will dictate the outcome of legal text will often define what constitutes cruelty. Like in Cruel and Unusual Punishment, what defines cruelty? The legal text will do that. And then like that is racist is another one that's like that. Now then there's text interpretation. The only evidence that is allowed is the words and their meaning. People confuse, the common fallacy is people confuse rationales as causes. And you probably believe that your reasons are your causes. And I'm hoping to cause a little bit of doubt in you about that throughout this class. These two types of interpretations can speak to one another. They both turn on the definition of words. What is implied by the text reveals what the law is, if it's case law. A causality versus meaning and interpretation are orthogonal in logic. They cannot use any evidence in common. You should never mix them up unless the text tells you to go out and look and see what causes some outcome. If the text tells you to do that, then you can do that. But if the text doesn't do that, the only information you can use in a text interpretation is the actual black and white text and what the meaning is. And then all of that, oh yeah, I've got some riddles in here. You should, I'm going to post these on a discussion. Then there's normative arguments. What the world should be has absolutely nothing to do with science and absolutely nothing to do with the text. And normative biases can interfere with your inferences because you're constantly making normative judgments. I like this professor. I think I'm going to like this class. I don't like this class. It's stupid. I'm, like you're constantly making these judgments, and your brain is wired to do so. And so if you're doing a careful normative argument, you've got to lay out your first principle assumptions. I'll give you an example. Somebody in the Economist makes an argument that Roe versus Wade caused the reduction in crime that we've seen. If you think that through, it's actually a pretty macabre causal theory. But as a scientist, you could look at that evidence. But if you're pro-life, I don't think you care whether it reduces the crime rate, right? The causality is not telling you what's moral necessarily. So it's important to kind of keep those separate. So if your first principle is biblical fundamentalism, then you use the Bible to help you understand what is moral, right? It's kind of like that. So there are some overlap. But when you've got confused claims going on in your head, then you've got chaos, and it's all there and nobody can figure out what's going on. So in the next class, we're going to learn about the history of political philosophy, 2,500 years. The purpose is not to tell you everything about political philosophy, but it's to show you where this part of the course fits in with some of the philosophical arguments. And there are examples, and that's what you're going to read about for the next class. And on Thursday, we're going to talk about how to pass exam 1. The readings will often have gray highlights, so you should pay special attention. And I like Clint Eastwood as a time to start packing. So we're finished for the day, but I'm going to stay on just in case anybody has any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody have any questions about anything?
I do.
Okay, good.
So I never really learned anything about American politics, and I was just questioning if there's something I can do before the course really starts, so I am a bit ahead, or if it's necessary or not.
You mean you're worried about how much you know about American politics?
Yes.
So there's a couple answers to this question. In Canvas, and let me just show you, I'm going to stop the share so I can share the screen in Canvas. Let's see. So if you go to mentoring advice, you have here some little bits of advice. There is a little text that's $8 on Amazon that is called "What Your Professor Thinks You Already Know About American Politics." And it's a short little booklet. And if you don't have $8, then just ask me for a copy. And I'd be happy to give it to you. But, the exams don't ask you to know things. So I hope that you do learn some things, but it's not my goal, So the best way to do well in the class is to practice the logical skills. I think that's the best way. I just think that our education system is so tied up with what people know. I mean, for instance, students sometimes will feel embarrassed if they don't know something, right? Isn't it like that? And here's what I think. I think if you don't know that thing, that's because you were never taught that thing. And whose fault is that? That's not your fault. That's not on you. And so if I could do one thing for students, it's to make them not ashamed of what they don't know. I mean, I know people are gonna probably listen to this part of the recording, but I'm gonna say something embarrassing anyway. I was in my 20s when I found out that we lost the Alamo. I thought, I was like, well, why are we talking about it all the time? And I'd taken Texas history. I lived in Texas. And it's like, what? We lost? Like, what, and it's not really we, I mean, I don't really want to say it that way, but the United States lost, that battle. And it's kind of the bottom line. But you know why I didn't know the bottom line? Because I was having to memorize the names of who was there. You know, they taught us, we spent 6 weeks on Native American history. And I had to memorize all kinds of names and customs, but I didn't learn there was a genocide, And so it's like things that you don't know or that you don't know how to do, that's the education system's fault. And the education system is, and I don't mean this about higher education necessarily, but education system, it feels like it's bad on purpose, And it's also bad because maybe we don't really understand what makes people do well and that kind of thing. Like people are trying their hardest, honestly, but we just don't know well what makes people learn. And so that could be part of the problem. And some of the problems in the education system are problems I'm trying to solve because I can only do what I can do. I can't make Congress fund education the way it should. I can't make the state of Texas decide not to be racist when they give out education funding. But I can do what I can do, and so I've tried to really look to see what I can do to make things better. So, if you don't know something, ask me, because you're not going to get any kind of judgment from me. If anything, I'm just going to judge whoever funds your school district when and so like, if you don't know whether the Vietnam War was before or after the Civil War, just ask, it's not your shame, So, but this little book has like a few basics on the 3 institutions, and then it's got a few basics about American history that is kind of good to know. Yeah, and so it's kind of a good intro. And I will post the entire textbook, which our Dean of Arts and Sciences wrote that textbook. And it's open source, it's free, and it's one of the best textbooks I've ever seen. I mean, I have some other chapters of textbooks that I like better, for not really better, but they just include some information that I feel like needs to be included. And so, but everything is, if you look at the modules, it'll go to like part 1. So everything that you sort of need to know, you can click on there. You've got the whatever the texts and things that you need to read, there for you. But you cannot know how many legislators there are and make an A+ in this class. That is not the basis of this class for me. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, you're welcome. All right. How did I do?
That's really good.
All right, awesome.
Great.
Yeah, no, it was great.
How'd your recitation section go this morning?
Montez showed up, one student, and we just chatted. It was like very low key.
Yeah.
So we had like half an hour conversation, and then he left. So it was all right. It was all right considering like no one showed up. We had a much larger turnout for this than I expected.
Yeah, I didn't really get a sense because I couldn't ever get, I have this going on 2 computers because I wanted to have looking at people on one of them, but because it's 2 computers and not just a monitor, I couldn't get that to work. So I didn't get a sense of how many people showed up.
There were quite a bit, more than I would have expected for a class that wasn't mandatory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good. Hopefully I haven't scared them away. Hopefully they'll tell their friends and they'll join. Um, so good. Well, I'm going to start a link for office hours and send it out to everybody. And I'm just gonna hang out for people to join for the next hour and a half or so.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Yeah. If you need anything, let me know. Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, and just send me an email and say, this worked, this didn't work, whatever you think.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right.
I think
Good.
and also
That's
for the yeah.
Okay, bye. Did you want to ask another question?
Not a question, but a comment.
Okay,
I'm from
good.
Venezuela.
What's that?
I'm from Venezuela.
You're
My-
kidding me.
Yeah, my father and my mother's Argentine, but my whole family's from Armenian, but I was born there.
Really?
Yeah.
Where?
In Caracas.
Okay.
But I was born there, but I left when I was like a year and a half, and I never lived there again.
Oh, I see. Okay. I lived on Margarita Island.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't remember a thing, but I've been there.
Oh, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of German tourists there, and it turned out I spoke more German than Spanish when I was there. Crazy.
That's amazing. Well, bye. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Christian, did you have a question?
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
So, how are you doing? I was just wondering, I had missed my recitation this morning, and I
Oh,
was curious.
that's okay. I think
Okay.
everybody did.
Okay, because I
Oh,
was just
wait,
reading
I'm
through the
not showing my
syllabus.
video. Sorry.
Okay, you're good.
That must mean Joey is your recitation leader, or maybe you're not, maybe you don't know.
I'm not sure yet who exactly is
Yeah,
the
so I
recitation
think
leader.
not much happened.
Okay.
Because technically the university was closed.
Yeah, that's why I assumed. That's why I didn't like email anyone or do anything
I think
about
that's right. Yeah. I mean, I didn't expect very many people to show up to this either.
Okay.
It's not required and the university was closed. I mean, I'd already moved it to Zoom anyway.
Mhm.
I'm not having people risk their lives to get to class. So I lean in the direction of safety.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, besides that, I was just curious about like, is there a rubric for the exam or not the exams, the essays? Because that first essay is in
Yes.
week
Let's see
3.
where that is. Here, let me see where that is. Where did I put that? Let me look. Let me look. Okay. Let me show you where it is. I found it.
Cool.
I can't believe I forgot where it was. I've been like obsessed about making sure the Canvas site is like reasonably organized.
Oh yeah, that's
Okay,
good.
so
Yeah.
if you go to the Canvas site opens up like this, right? And you'll go to the course outline, part 1, and that's where you get the PowerPoints. That's where you get, anything that you need to prepare, reading. Sometimes I have videos, that kind of stuff. So, and then you can click on links to find, where assignments are and that kind of thing. So you would, click on this link to take the critical thinking test or exercise that we're doing next week. But in this one, this is when the essays due in week 3. So you click on that and you can get your prompt and your rubric.
Oh,
And it's
cool.
actually quite long and detailed, where I explain, okay, this is what you want to do. I give some underlying logic of what it would be. I give some examples of things that you could write about. Not that you
Uh-huh.
have to pick those things, but those are some things that that you would pick, and then tell you, okay, so this is what you should do to outline and begin writing. This is what happens in your first paragraph, second paragraph, and then I give some examples even. And it's a 1-page essay, but it's single space, so about 4 paragraphs. And then here's a
Okay.
rubric, an exact grading scheme. So your TA on the first time that you write the essay is just going to give you a score for each of these categories so that you can get exact feedback for what mistakes you made. And so like if you are making an argument that requires evidence, you get 50 points. But if it's not causal, they take away 40. If it's
Uh-huh.
causal but not general, you take away 30. And then, so are there arguments, counter arguments? And if you have a normative interjection or anything that's, related to the topic of the lecture today, stay in your lane. So if you're making a causal argument, don't let normative infect your brain. A lot of students
Okay.
think that making a normative argument is bad, and it's not bad. It's just doesn't belong in a causal essay. And then you can get extra credit for various other things that you do. And so I think you
Okay.
can get a total possible of 140%, if you do all the things that that you're supposed to do there.
Cool. So
Yeah,
real
so there's a
quickly,
lot of, but you just get full credit for doing it first time.
yeah, could we go over an example of a causal argument by chance? Just so
Oh,
I'm,
sure. Okay, so I think I have some examples here. So
I
let's
also,
say,
I do like scientific fields just as a background. So,
yeah, yeah. And I mean, this is great because when you take chemistry as an
mhm,
introductory student, you're not answering the scientific questions that are on the horizon of chemistry, right? You've got to learn some nuts and bolts before you get there. What's great
mhm,
about social science is that any old person can walk around, having a theory about, what has caused this and what has caused that, right? And so it allows for uh hands-on experience doing that science. So like if I was the dictator of the world, everybody in science would take a class like this first. Then they take their science. Then they become scientists because they know how to critique all of the inferences, right? And so it's they know how it's done, basically.
I
So
mean, I
let's
kind of resonate
say,
with that because I mean, I'm a senior at CU now, so I'm a biochem major, so I've taken a lot of STEM classes now. So I've experienced that, and going into it, I wish I would have taken like a science history course or something to really prime me to get into the current of science, almost a better background. And I feel like that's something that the education system is just lacking a little bit, in my opinion. But that's just one person's opinion. So
yeah, well, it's the same as my opinion. So I agree with you about that. I mean, in this class, I'm going to be testing teaching hypotheses because I've been trying to make the case that having a class like this would make people better when they start doing data analysis or when they start doing, statistical analysis or,
mhm,
whatever they might do in upper division, understanding the nuts and bolts of how you make a causal argument and how to critique a causal argument, like what's the counter argument and how to lay all that out. There's nuts and bolts that just are not being taught. And you know how I know they're not being taught? Because
mhm,
extremely advanced statistics publications where statisticians are writing for other statisticians, they're telling them not to make mistakes that I'm telling you not to make in this class that they're making. And
mhm.
so that's why I'm trying to avoid those people. Honestly, they sort of need a class like this, and they've never had a class like this. And honestly, do you know what scientists probably have in common is they like being sure. They like knowing things, right? And is a
Mhm.
great thing to know things, but sometimes that desire to know can get in the way of your desire to pursue more, you know? And
Hmm.
so, like, maybe one of these questions jumps out at you, like, what causes people to protest? What causes people to support higher taxes? Some people are patriotic, some people are not. Is any one of those jumping out at you? What causes people to support gay marriage, support Black Lives Matter?
Actually, the third one, what causes levels of economic inequality to be higher or lower in various countries? I just
Great. Okay.
yeah, I did
So,
this case study last semester in my business class on Yemen and infectious diseases and kind of just thinking about, well, I had picked up that argument apart and deduced that, water, famine, all these, water insecurity, food insecurity, there are so many underlying problems, even structural and architectural, and, down to where they are geographically. There are so many of these smaller, minute issues beyond infectious diseases that are just way more critical to, look at rather than looking. I mean, it is important to be looking at infectious diseases, but looking at food and water insecurity, in my opinion, are way more important because those are what are contributing at the end of the day to all this infectious disease. And so maybe tying in the causes there of food and water insecurity could be a um relate that to economic inequalities, but I'm not sure.
yeah. So would you say that economic inequality causes uh food insecurity? I mean, in a way, it's
Mm,
kind of similar, right? Not
yeah.
everybody in Yemen has water insecurity, right? Some people are hoarding all the resources, is my guess, right? So that
Mhm.
I'm sure it rates super highly in terms of economic inequality.
Yeah, because I feel like they're pretty hand in hand, but
You know, stuff at the level of countries kind of flies in the face of what I was telling you earlier, because, in some cases you sort of have to know a little bit about what goes on inside of countries and what the international pressures are and that kind of thing.
oh,
But
totally.
if you thought like just like try to imagine that you're coming up with a cause of economic inequality that no one else has ever thought of. Like that is the standard of being good social science. You have to, like, everybody who's got a job at this university came up with an explanation that no one had ever thought of that made people's mind get blown, right? That's our bread and butter. And so some some people might say something like uh you know the level of ethnic and racial diversity is probably kind of a go-to in the sense of if you look at a place like Sweden, uh,
Mhm.
now there's more racial and ethnic diversity there, but they have a lot of economic equality, and they have also very low ethnic and racial diversity. But maybe like while you're uh, getting your sea legs in terms of making a causal argument, it might be better to think about causality of what makes humans different from one another. And the reason is because you're a human. And so you can identify what goes on inside of a human's mind, right? Like you know enough to know what goes on. And so like maybe we could translate your interest in economic inequality into an interest of what makes people think that economic inequality is a problem,
Hmm.
right? Because not everybody does.
Yeah,
Lots of
that's fair.
economists are pro economic inequality, and
Yeah,
so it would be
I'll
kind
have
of
to write that
interesting
down
to
real
know
quick if
that,
you don't mind.
right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that grabbing you?
Yeah, I'm writing it down real quick if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that would be great.
Cool. I just made a little note of it, but I like that. And, even tying it down to I guess bringing it like down to the human level, like what makes each human individual and special and why we need to cherish that rather than, I don't know, think, because I feel like a lot of people maybe you could deduce that into a racial argument, an argument of racism and bringing past racisms as well. But yeah, I don't know. This is because my training's been in pretty much natural sciences, so this is kind of out of my comfort
No, but you're
zone.
doing great. I mean, you're
But
doing great. And so let me give you some examples of some bizarre little tidbits of social science that have come up with explanations that are weird. I'll give you one that I found that I don't think anybody knows. So I have to get this published at some point, I guess. But I was trying to understand. So first of all, I knew that our world was going to blow up into political violence in 2020 before COVID hit. And I knew that because of reading all the literature in other countries about what causes political violence in other countries. And I could see that the circumstances were there. So I put survey questions in a survey that I had to have finalized by January before even COVID hit. And then I had those survey questions and they went out during the George Floyd, Black Lives Matter protests and all the violence that we saw during that time. And so it was really great. And I collected a ton of data on economic attitudes. And the reason I did that is because I didn't think they would matter. But if you think something's not going to matter, you better do a good job trying to find the opposite, right? And so I asked a bunch of questions about people's work life, their how they feel about their income, do they have work hour instability, just like a ton of stuff, right? And luckily for me, they weren't that correlated with support for political violence. One of the biggest factors about support for political violence was whether the person had gotten divorced in the last year. And that's controlling for every single economic factor associated with that person. And so then you got to stop and take a step back and think, what in the hell is going on there? Like, what is it about humans that maybe want to throw a bomb on the whole world when their identity is disrupted or something like that? So then it made me think that, like, what is it about social identity? And I found out that groups that, like, subgroups, racial and ethnic and other kinds of class-based, other kinds of subgroups, the more they were felt a strong belonging to their subgroup, the way lower support for violence they had, which also flies in the face with some of the current thoughts. People think, well, you have, people identifying with Black Lives Matter, they're going to be the ones supporting the violence. Black people who identify strongly with members of their same race are the least violent demographic in American politics. And that's something that I think people would be interested to know, So when you think about that, like, you want to be thinking like in those terms, like, what is it that's going on in people's lives and what could be causing people to want to throw a bomb on the world, or people, like in this case, not having compassion when people don't have water security or food security. Like, what is that,
Totally, yeah.
And so, like, making a non-obvious argument and then that needs evidence is kind of what we're looking for. That's the gold standard. And if you're going to be a scientist in biochemistry, your gold standard is to find something that nobody else has thought of. And so this is gonna give you training wheels to do that kind of thing. That's the purpose of it. So you've got to come up with something that you've thought about, or you could research in the scientific literature it would be social scientific literature to think about what these things are, and come up with an explanation. And
Hmm.
then you just say at the beginning of the essay, I believe being divorced in the last year is going to cause people to support political violence. And this is why. And you try to bring in just logic, evidence from correlations. If I were doing it, I bring in evidence from other scientific studies about what people who are having a divorce, what they're going through. You can use your life experience as long as you don't pretend that your life experience is going to tell the truth necessarily about causality, but so you can use just sort of logic. Like I think a person, had a belief about what their life was going to be, and that suddenly is undercut. And so
Mhm,
then that
mhm.
makes you think maybe when people have their life narrative disrupted, that they want to throw a bomb on the world, or they don't care about people who are poor, or I've had people make the argument that having being firstborn causes you to have less empathy for people who are doing less, who have less. That's kind of an interesting argument. That's not the first thing people would think of. The
Yeah.
first thing people think of is, they don't have any empathy. And I'll tell you what, my read of the literature on empathy is that empathy can cause people to do evil things,
Hmm.
like strangely, there's a
Interesting.
dark side of empathy, not just for the person who has empathy.
I
Because
was about to
I
say,
know
I
I'm
feel like
off
I'm
the
an
charts.
outlier.
What's
So I feel like
that?
I have a lot of empathy,
Right.
but
And there's
I was
two
a
kinds.
firstborn child, so
Okay, right, exactly. No, and this is an important principle. Just
uh-huh.
because something causes outcomes doesn't mean it's causing your outcome, right? And so,
Hmm.
and there's two forms of empathy. There's the kind of empathy where you actually are doing the thinking of the empathy, where you're like, I wonder what that person is experiencing, right? That kind of empathy is the best kind of empathy. That's the kind of empathy that makes people want to help people, that makes people want their life to mean something, that makes people stand in someone else's shoes, and they can talk with somebody else, even though they disagree with them or something like that. That kind of empathy is good. The kind of empathy that can be bad is the kind of empathy that a bear feels when their child is being threatened. And for some people, the idea of a movement or a belief is the baby. And so they will kill and murder and, to protect like Christianity or a social movement organization, or what, cults get people to do crazy things. And they
Hmm.
do that because people in a cult have empathy for the baby, which is the idea of the cult that is being upheld. Right. And empathetic people. I have a friend who studies cults, and he's told me that he asked me a bunch of questions, and he's like, you have every marker that would make you join a cult. And he kind of told me that to be, like, you got to watch out, and
Yeah.
I don't belong to anything, extreme at all. And, but it's like things like you fly in your dreams. It's
Hmm.
things like a deep sense of emotional empathy when you see someone suffering,
Hmm.
because that part of that empathy can be used against you in a sense, for a cult. So it's like things like this. You wouldn't think, flying in your dreams, because I
Yeah.
always fly in my dreams, and I have lucid dreams, and there's all
Cool.
these things that are associated with that. And it's
Yeah.
like, I'm glad I know, it's something to look out for, but it's
Yeah,
also,
I've never flown in my dreams before. I don't know if that's bad. I haven't, but
well, in a sense, it makes it's an indication that you have a lower likelihood of joining a cult. It's all it is an indication. It's just like most people don't have lucid dreams. Most people don't fly. Um,
yeah.
But
So
in
do you
in
have,
any case, it's like things like that that would
Mhm.
be not the first thing somebody thinks, something non-obvious, something that would push the boundaries, you know.
Mhm.
So like I've been thinking that lately that people who are thinking about their own mortality, that can cause some pretty bad things.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's like stuff like that. So it's called mortality salience. And
Huh.
they do it in psychological experiments. Well, they'll tell half the people, they'll say, write a story about how you think you might die one day or whatever. And they don't say anything to the other. And there's complete differences.
Mhm.
You know, and fairness is kind of what your economic inequality is getting to. There's not a literature in political psychology, because I read it all, that is more interesting and bizarre than fairness. Human beings are crazy when it comes to fairness.
Mhm.
People hate being given something unfair as much as they hate something unfair taken away from them. That's an interesting conclusion that literature makes. And so it's like it starts to inspire your curiosity of like, why are we like that? And if that's true, why are we tolerating the levels of inequality that we're seeing? And we got people, nobody wants to do anything about it. And that's not true,
True.
nobody, but you know,
Yeah,
we're not
but it
doing
seems
anything
like it.
about it, you know?
Seems like everybody just wants to, cares about themselves more than they care about, trying to create
It
better
could
livelihoods for others.
be. But I swear, there's not great evidence that people act out of self-interest. I mean, a lot of stuff that you're going to be learning in this class
Uh-huh.
rests on an assumption of self-interest, right? And in some regards, obviously, but people who are in abusive cults, I mean,
Mhm.
Scientologists sit in prisons
True.
voluntarily
Mhm.
because they believe in a cult. That's not self-interest. There's a lot more going on in our heads that is crazy, that's not
Mhm.
out of self-interest. And so it's like legislators may be acting out of self-interest, but they're responding to voters who have lost their minds about what fairness is. And in some cases, they cling to notions of fairness so tightly that they need to believe everything is fair, which makes them not want to do anything about it. So
Mhm.
it's actually a strange need to believe in fairness. That's called just war theory.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I learned
Not
about that
just
in
war
class.
theory, I'm sorry, just
Wait, no,
it's
that's
called
history.
just world. Sorry,
Just
just
world.
world theory.
Uh-huh.
Because people will believe we don't need to do anything about this because everything is fair. And then the question is why, you know? And you
Mhm.
just want to dig deeper. And, I would like to do about 20 experiments, just to try to understand that, what's going on with people for that. Like people will deny that racism exists. Most Americans deny that racism exists. They just believe it does not exist.
Which
And
is crazy, yeah.
it's crazy. Like it is just not consistent with the evidence. And
Oh,
it
yeah.
doesn't to acknowledge that it exists doesn't mean you have to do anything about it, but they won't, there's large swaths of people that won't admit that there could be unfairness, probably because it impugns their own life story.
Mhm.
It disparages their own life story. If they've benefited somehow from something unfair, it does the
Mhm.
same thing to a human as getting a divorce. And so when you think about that, disentangling what's going on for all of this kind of stuff is just it really, to me, it's crazy interesting,
Mhm.
how human beings really are. So if you dig into some of that stuff, you end up with sort of a non-obvious explanation for what causes people to not want to do anything about the unfairness that exists, you know? Oh, hang
Yeah,
on.
definitely. Sorry, my voice has been a little raspy. I got COVID a couple weeks ago.
You're what? What's that?
Oh, sorry. I said my voice has just been a little raspy today. I got COVID a couple of weeks ago, but
Oh, me too. I got it
um,
too.
yeah, no, it was not fun. But no, I totally resonate with what you were saying there. And whoa, I mean,
I
honestly, thinking
know.
about
It's like, it's so much at once where you're just like, what? You know, and so
yeah, but breaking it down though, and taking pieces chunk by chunk to think about them logically, and then progressively building an argument from each of those either correlations or statistical analyses that you do, or other sort of social calculuses, and kind of just figuring out what you can really do to, I don't know, make that causal argument. So that's where I've just kind of picked up on starting to learn that. So I appreciate the primer. I do have to head out because I've got a class
oh,
at
okay.
11:30.
All right,
But
good.
I really
Well,
appreciate
if you
meeting
want to
you.
write an essay and send it my way, I'll give you my thoughts on it.
Okay. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Professor Baird. Is it
Okay.
Baird?
What's that?
Is it Baird or?
Baird.
Okay, cool. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
All right, good. Okay, look forward to seeing you again. You take care.
Yeah.
Stay warm today.
Will do. Likewise. Nice meeting.
Okay, okay, bye.